If you need information on anything for edmonton.by.com, we try to keep that updated. But we are very active on the devedmonton.com Slack. So there's a lot of groups on there. So if you want to connect with the community, pop on Dev Edmonton. We have a channel there for the Python Meetup, and it's self-invite, so you don't need to bug anybody. So that's that one. So our first sponsor is
Spider Labs. So I work for Trustworthy Spider Labs. I'm a senior security consultant there. Because we're buying pizza, we get a short little blurb, and really that blurb is if you have any sort of security testing need, that's what our jam is. We do incident response, we do web application penetration testing, we do network penetration testing, we do red teaming, purple teaming. Like really, if you have a need across the security testing space, hit me up after. I'll give you the inside scoop.
Cool. And our other sponsor is Quote2Me. So I'm just gonna come up and your spiel about Quote2Me.
I'll be a very brief spiel. So Quote2Me, we're a startup here in Edmonton, building some software for the construction industry. We're not SEC people, InfoSec people. We're on the Python side. So yeah, we're hiring developers here in Edmonton. If anybody's looking for work, I know someone who is, come find me at the break or at afterwards, and let's chat.
Awesome. I always, make a point to say Startup Edmonton, thanks for the space. It's definitely makes things a lot easier to organize when we have a dedicated space. I'd like to present to you from the Python community the Pac-Man rule. There's a bit of socializing that kind of goes on all the time, and in the Python community we have this concept of the Pac-Man rule, and so when you're standing in a group of people socializing, always stand like Pac-Man and leave a little bit of space on the side, and that makes it really, really easy for folks who are new, who may be nervous coming in, to kind of join into the circle of your particular conversation group. So I wanted to share that little tidbit. Today's plan is that me and Cody, who's out there getting some pizza order for us, are gonna be some scripting, fixing, upping. So we challenged the YEGSEC folks to see if they can send us some short scripts from their side of things that they were quickly
short janky scripts.
Short janky scripts. And we attempted to do some quick cleanup on them, and in turn hope to give you some tips about some ways that you can quickly, or in more detail, as Cody will kind of speak to, make your scripts more readable, in terms of coming back to it, more reusable, and all kinds of things. So that's the talk. So, and then the other thing is going to be we are going to do
Capture the flag. So if this doesn't mean anything to you, that's fine. Capture the flag is basically a legal way to get your feet dirty doing hacking. So if you're interested in hands-on InfoSec stuff, if you're interested in how the applications you write can get broken, if you've ever wondered, like, what does it actually look like when someone's banging away at your web app and something happens, and you're wondering what's behind, like, hey, Capital One got breached, like, what does that actually mean? What does it actually look like? That's what Capture Flag is all about. So basically what it is, it's a whole pile of challenges geared around teaching you things. So because it's teaching oriented, this is a fantastic way for you to learn things. So if you know a lot about InfoSec and you learn more, Capture the Flag's for you. If you know nothing about InfoSec and you want to learn, it's still a great way to do it. So we're going to be doing a number of different challenges. We have people that are happy to help out. If you have a laptop, absolutely join in. If you don't have a laptop, feel free to shoulder surf. You can ask them first, but feel free to shoulder surf and we'll be happy to teach you out. Just out of curiosity though, since we are doing 2 meetups, quick show of hands, how interesting does this seem to you? If you're here and you want to do that, throw your hand in the air and we can get an idea of numbers. And about half. We take all comers. If you know nothing about InfoSec, that is totally fine. All right, cool.
Awesome. And if you don't and you want to do some Python challenges, I will attempt to find some Python challenges by the time we get to that time.
Fun fact, some capture the flags require Python.
So that will work nicely, but it's just an idea to basically, to just take some time and do some coding in Python. So whether you're doing something adventures with capture the flag or just finding some challenges online, whether it's, working through some Fibonacci or something like that, but just an idea just to challenge yourself and a little bit of Python. So a little bit of coding going on today. And I think that's it. Oh, I wanted to just run through for the Python folks that we have 2 events coming up. PyCon Canada is going to be out on November 16th to 19th out in Toronto. The tickets are selling, I guess, now. The schedule's been up, so if you have take a look at the schedule, see if anything interests you. Conferences are super fun. And PyCascades 2020 is going to be in February 8th and 9th in Portland, US, which is probably the closest kind of Python conference. It's a regional Python conference in the Pacific Northwest. It's also super, super cool. I think a few of us are going to either or, so if you're interested and want to hang out and go together, that's super cool. So I just want to let anybody know. And we like to do a little Python tip during our Python meetup, so I'll just present the Python tip here. The newer versions of Python, starting for probably 3.6, have these wonderful things called f-strings. And it's just one of those little unicorn awesome presents that makes you feel really good using Python 3. And just as a short example, I guess, of the code, there's kind of 3 ways right now, as Python ages, new techniques coming up, but their first code example uses the percentage sign to kind of do the actual printing of the variables and the actual string. And the second one uses the format function, and the third one uses an f string. And there's a little f right between on the first, right there. Which pretty much makes it kind of formattable by default, and using the brackets, that way you can just pass in the variable into it. And it's really nice and readable. And it's super powerful. And even on the bottom examples there is another f string where it shows that you can actually format the data as well. So you can pass in the variable, but also pass in some kind of a, hey, here's a date, I'm going to pass you the date, but also format the date in this particular format. And they're super, super handy. They're super handy. So I just wanted to share that Python tip. And just for the next time, the next YEGSEC is November 3rd. Hopefully, yes, okay, good. I checked the calendar on the website. And the next YEGSEC meetup is November 19th, and our next EdmontonPy is November 13th, which is also not a Monday because we're also pushed on that day too. So we're not smashing up, we'll just move to a different day. And that's it. I'm going to attempt to use Cody's computer here. All right, this is the original that was submitted. So I will not talk about this one lots, other than we kind of want to know what's going on. I was really happy there with some comments on this, because I don't typically see a lot of kind of code on the security side of things. I'm usually an expert in Django development, so I was really happy to see code comments in here, so that was really nice. Good surprise. Generally overall, this script is very kind of linear, so it's just importing the data and it's just running through, and we've got some calls to user inputs. We've got some code that's copying a file over from the folder over to another specific folder, and restarting some processes. We've got some code that goes and does a request in order to connect and check to see if some malware stuff, if we're able to hit Putlocker website or able to download a zip file. I think that's what I got. I don't know if Michael's here. Is that you?
He's not here today.
He's not here. Is that generally what it is? Yeah, I just wanted to kind of make sure that I read it correctly so that I know that you guys are everybody's kind of looking at the exact same thing. It's printing the response, and basically it's proving that you can do something to a blacklisted site and a blacklisted file that you shouldn't be able to do. And that's pretty much the end of the script. So generally it was pretty easy to read through. But I'm going to go to the other, no, control. Here we go. Okay, so my version is going to be just a quick rundown. So, it's just a matter of what's the quickest way I can kind of do a little bit of formatting to gain as much readability as possible without having to kind of restructurize or anything like that. And this is, a fairly short script, so a lot of wasn't need to be on. The first step I have is, use doc strings instead of comments. So a lot of times we can, at some point in time when your Python program is going to go a lot larger, if you're using doc strings at the beginning, you can actually hook them up into documentation. It'll pull the actual doc strings that you've used here automatically into documentation.
What is a doc string?
Doc string is anything here that starts on a module, a class, a function, and it's got 3 sets of quotes on the top and 3 sets of quotes on the bottom here. And we can document a whole module, in this case, a class, a function, and we can able to use something like Django, Python Sphinx docs to be able to be like, hey, go through all of my code and pull all of the doc strings up, and it'll kind of magically, have documentation from that. The reason that's really important is that if you have a lot of times when you have separate documentation not hooked up to your code and your code changes, you never actually remember to go and update the code. I mean, you think you will. You promise yourself you will. You will not. Yeah, exactly. You'll get to that tomorrow. But when we have the actual documentation right here and the actual code pulling, and then it'll get connected, then we change the element. And this was already here. This was just a comment in the actual script. So, this is just a matter of taking them, putting through it, and making the doc string instead of a comment using the hash function. So going down, some packages, I did run this script through a couple of auto linters, so it's just like 2 actually. I was like, okay, well, there's in Python we have this pep style, which is pep 8, and it's just it has guidelines for how you should stylize your Python code. And you don't need to actually remember any of these things. It'll certainly help you as you're writing it, but you can actually just call automated formatters for you that will actually just automate your code according to the guidelines. And that gets you really quickly up to having the same kind of set standards as other Python scripts or open source packages. And that makes just really quickly, it's a really easy win to be able to read code a little bit quicker and better. Some other packages another package that I used, this one is Flake8 along with this. Flake8 is what I ran through just to see if there's any stylistic differences I should address. But I also ran this package called isort, which is really nice. This is a really small thing, but there's a package of isort you can run on a Python that will just sort your imports for you. And that's a really simple thing, on this script. But when you have a really long script, and I've seen scripts that are, a couple of thousand lines, and you may have a lot of packages, and they'll actually go through and, style the Python packages and then third-party packages or other standard library packages, and it'll kind of sort for you all nicely in alphabetical, and it's just a little small thing, but it's a little tiny little bit of help in terms of being able to see what's coming from, what else needs to be installed. One of the things that I think is really useful, particularly when we're dealing with scripts, is that there are sometimes ways to kind of share the scripts or use the same scripts for other things. And there are configuration things, like I'm hitting a particular URL, I'm hitting a particular port, I'm loading a particular file. And you may want to go through and adjust those simple things. And changing some of this configuration is probably one of the things that you may do most often when kind of taking one script and adjusting it for something else. And so being able to pull those and seeing them right at the top in terms of like, these are my settings, this is the configuration, and having them being stored as constants this way makes it really easy to kind of not have to dig through the code to kind of dig those up. So we've got configuration. Now I have everything wrapped up here in a main function for a couple of reasons. One, Cody's going to go more into depth for, that there is a benefit of wrapping and not having all of your kind of code in the global space. I'm going to let him kind of illustrate why, but I'm going to go through the fact that it's just looking at this code here. Remember, I was kind of attempting to with you read to try to figure out what the actual code is doing. Here's a function, and you have no idea how it works. But if you just read this part, you'll be able to figure out what the whole script is going. That's because I've kind of split everything up into functions. So I don't know how it works underneath, but I know that we're copying some malicious exclusions, we're restarting a malware process, we're showing a blacklisted site, and we're running a blacklisted file. So when it comes to you, a lot of the code that we're writing is going to be read. It's going to be read by me, could be me, I don't know. Could be the new person that starts after you, could be you 3 months from now and you don't remember what you wrote, was usually the most common way. And so a lot of times you go in the doc string, see if it tells you what to do, but also go through the code. And when you kind of have this main function coming through, you can really easily see just by reading a couple of functions, be like, well, what this is intending to do without having to go any through the details. Or, for example, if you want to change something in the blacklisted site function, you don't even have to look at the rest of the code to kind of try to find where that is. You can kind of go directly into that step and not worry about changing the rest of the code. So that was the first thing that I kind of did, is split it up into the functions. Thanks. Yeah, all the way probably up to, we're good there. So I took the comments that were basically already in there, and again, put a doc string on them, and then function number one, all it's doing is copying malicious exclusions. And this seems really weird because it's a very simple, one-step piece of code. But when I'm reading the code in the original function, I don't know exactly what this is. I can't remember what package it is. Is it doing? Do I have to Google what that package is? But if I can define it with a good name for me to remember, if I can name that function in a way that it's really obvious what that function is doing, that I don't need to know exactly the details of this unless I need to change it. So writing the actual documentation up here instead of right above the thing, and then being, okay, we're copying, we're done this step. Yeah, I can move all the way up to there. Here's the other function that we're just restarting the malware processes. Same thing, it was kind of just like take some of that code that was already in the main one, stick it in a function, make the actual documentation just be a doc string, and just keep these nice for it together. They were already nicely organized. The other one is the show blacklisted site. Oh, here's, sorry, scroll down. I changed this one to an F string too. I'm short too, but you are causing problems. You went to, no you didn't. You went, oh right here. Thanks, I don't have to jump anywhere. So I swapped that to a nice little F string. So here's a service name that's defined here, and I just passed that through into as a name. So super nice and readable with the F strings, the way they're done like that. Okay, you can move it up. Cool. Here's what I have for the actual configuration settings that were up top to be like, hey, connect this client, go to this host, go to this port. Here's the F string, well, that's also passed in as the string, and print the response. And there wasn't a lot of code changes that I've done. It was mostly kind of just splitting up into the functions, using F strings, using these actual configuration, and seeing what's going on. Theoretically, this should all work. It's not tested. so I wouldn't know for sure. But the other kind of benefit is sometimes splitting out functions is that, here we're using kind of manually going through and creating a GET request with the sockets. But we could use a request package, for example, which is a really nice way of dealing with that. And that would be really easy just to go to this little function here with these 4 lines and use some other technique people to do that without having to make sure that the other stuff is not working. And then this last one is just to run the blacklisted file, and it just hits the URL, retrieve this URL, and we should be able to retrieve that file, save that file here, and then run that actual file. That's all it's doing. One of the nice things about kind of having this also in configuration is this is a really good example of a function that you'll probably want to reuse in many, many other places. And when it was kind of hard-coded with the file URL, then you're going to end up copying and pasting that all the way across different functions. And this one makes it really, really easy to kind of reuse a little bit more. So that's it. I have a function here that basically hits this and then calls the main function to run the whole thing. One of the other things I want to note is that I'm using a lot of underscores here under define underscore and then the function name. Python doesn't do private and public functions, but we do have some best practices kind of that are mainly agreed upon to do that. Main function is a function that we just want people to run as the main thing that's happening in this particular module. And anytime you kind of have this underscore in a function name, it just means, hey, this is mainly used for this particular module. Like it's not, if you import this file, don't call this one directly. That's all it really says. Don't call this directly. This is meant to stay in this file, and it's working with the other functions. So we do that so that if you wanted to use this particular file somewhere else, you wanted to import it, you can open this file and be like, let me see which of these functions I can kind of safely import into another one. Which one do I actually get to interact with? And you can kind of ignore the other ones that way, unless you're working in the specific file, and then you're like, okay, now I'll look at the private functions here. So that's just kind of a best practice in terms of private versus public functions. That's my short spiel. Cody's going to go a little bit more in depth, but I will take questions.
So why not just call main directly? Like why put it in that?
Cody will show you. He's got a little bit of examples around that, so I'll let him kind of delve into that a little bit deeper. Yeah. Yeah, right, Cody? Yes.
One minor thing you might want to mention is
Yeah.
this has been converted to Python 3.
It has been. Good eye. I totally did. So for me, it's just like, part of the things where I'm like refactoring kind of scripts that I've seen is it's just like my job is to kind of bring it down to the modern standards, to the best practices. And typically, depending, that there is this decision that's always made, should I upgrade this to Python 3? I mean, given that Python 3 right now is January 1st, I believe, and Python 2 will be obsolete. In this case, yes, it's very nicely that these extra 2 seconds that I needed to spend to put this into Python 3 would definitely be worth it. That has been made on a case-by-case basis if you have a lot of legacy code. In this case, there was really only a couple of things that I changed. I was able to add f-strings. So I didn't have to change it. The other code would have worked, but I'm like, oh, cool. Well, since I'm going to swap this Python 3, or I'm going to test this against Python 3, I can use f-strings. And the other thing that I did is that was using raw input, and now it's just using input, and that's Python 3. But definitely a keen eye on that. And that's all it took to kind of upgrade it to Python 3.
So if
Yeah.
you've shown us like the A and the B version
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah.
But if I'm actually like, I've got my text editor open, what is the process of going from that first code to the next one?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times when we're thinking of writing these kinds of scripts, we're really thinking very linearly in terms of like, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And as we're thinking that really, really linear, we're writing the code right underneath like one thing at a time. We write the comment, we write the code, we write the comment, we write the code. And I think you still start the same way. But what you tend to do is maybe approach it a little bit in terms of like, okay, what do I need to do? And then write the function name with the doc string that needs to basically do that step. Go to fill it in. Just be like, here's the function name, here's what needs to be done. Here's the function name, here's what needs to be done. Here's the function name, here's what needs to be done. I'll write this app in my little main function, and then go through and then focus on each function at a time. And so your thinking is still at the beginning, your planning is still going linearly in terms of you understanding what needs to be done step by step. But then you're able to kind of focus your your eyes and your mind on one single function at a time, and then those tie in together. So I think that's the easiest kind of recommendation I have for how to approach it differently. Yeah. Yeah.
When you said like private and public variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mean to say it's global and local?
No, just I guess it's more of a conceptual idea in Python because we don't really have this is a private variable or this is a private function. That's, Java has that, for example. You can kind of define a function or a variable as specifically, this is private, this is public, and it'll actually check to make sure you did it, did access properly. And Python just doesn't do that. Yeah, so we do still have this idea of like, we still code toward it. We don't, check that there's no compiling error because you've accessed something that's private or didn't mean to. Yeah.
I know there's a global keyword. Is there a local keyword? I've never used it.
I don't know. I think that there is things. Yeah.
Like it's actually.
I think it's just global.
Yes.
There's global and non-local.
Non-local. Yeah.
So if you put an
Yeah.
equal sign inside of a function, that automatically makes a local variable. You have to if you want to assign to a global variable within a function.
Yeah, if you want to make it.
Then you have to call the global keyword.
You need to say it's global. And as if I'm writing Python code, I almost never
Yeah.
assign
No,
to a global. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So I know that. But what about non-local?
There's non-local.
I've never heard of non-local.
This
Yeah.
is great.
I've seen global.
If you have a function in a function in a function, and you
Oh,
assign
crap.
to a variable in the lexical closure
Yeah.
of that function, you want to assign to that variable defined outside that function,
Yeah, I
then you
get
use the
it.
non-local keyword.
Yeah.
Okay.
But none of it's protected too, right? So you can always access Java, right? It's not.
I think,
None of it's ever protected when you
Yeah.
say it's local or not, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, you can get into a little bit of trouble when you're kind of assigning things to variables that haven't been like defined inside of functions and things like that. But generally, it's a little, you know what you're doing for sure. Python gives you lots of leeway, so yeah, be clear of that. Cody, you're up. You have the mic.
Good work. So I heard nothing that Ashia said, so I don't know how much overlap there's going to be between what we discuss, but hopefully you guys will get a little bit something different from mine as from hers.
Pizza is now on the way.
So that's also really awesome. Everyone loves a little bit of pizza. My name's Cody. I don't have a preference on which editor I like to use. I've given a couple other presentations out of the YEGSEC and the EdmontonPy Meetup. That's a quick brief about me. But so today we're going to talk a little bit about refactoring a script. So first off, kudos to whoever was brave enough to offer up their code, because that's it's a very personal thing to have your creation be audited.
See, this is for the first one was for my boss, so I get to just text him
Oh, perfect. Perfect. So the way I tried to approach this is I kind of thought, if I was just beginning Python and I had been given such a script, how would I go about, trying to make this better? And so I thought, it's awesome to know some of the tools that are available. I found a couple cool tricks that help minimize some code, and depending on your project, give some tips on how to modularize and eventually become a bigger project, because depending on the project, you might grow beyond the one script thing. You might want to be breaking it up a little bit. So I'll give you some tips on how to ease that transition so you don't have to spend too much time going back. But first thing is first, we got to stop calling it bad code. When it comes to refactoring, I always feel like we as programmers like to put this it's bad code, I have to refactor it. But bad code in my definition is code that doesn't do its purpose. So if you work for a business and they have some code, and that code makes money, or it makes someone who doesn't program's life easier, it's not bad code. And I've seen refactoring screw up that code, so then you really didn't get ahead by refactoring it for it to be better. There are valid things like this code is absolutely atrocious and I can't understand it, but it's not bad code because it helps someone else. And that's really the thing I want to get across is in the end, it's does it actually satisfy some utility for some person? So just because it doesn't fit your style guides doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad code. So don't take this and be like, now I got to run these tools all over my code base because they don't fully pepe. Well, yeah, you'll probably cause more damage and your boss will not be happy. So, I'm lazy. Step 1, automatic formatting of files because I don't want to think too much. So when I got this file, I was like, okay, perfect. First two things I like to apply to almost every Python file is use isort and a tool called black. And isort will take all of your top imports and just put them in a nice order and group them depending on where they came from, first party, third party, blah, 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 blah. And then black is a very good introduction to if you don't know how you should be formatting lists or organizing the code, black is a very opinionated formatter that will just write it all down and you get what you get. And the nice thing about black is it goes down to the level of the AST. So for people who aren't familiar with that term, that's the low-level bytecode. So when it rewrites code, it takes the code that it would compile down to on the machine and compares it to the result that it writes out, so that it doesn't ever write out bad code and break your project. So I've never had black break anything, which has been really nice. And it's literally as easy as installing those two things. So if I can find the original one, and unfortunately it's not the biggest screen, but that's going to be fine. So this is the original script that I got. And you can see there's comments and there's all kinds of formatting and stuff like that. So as soon as you run black on the file and then reload it, it's just going to do a bunch of little niceties for you, where it's going to make things a little bit more readable, and you may not agree with it. One common complaint is I don't like everything on its own line, or I don't like the way it formats. And the thing is, no one 100% likes what black does, and that's kind of the compromise we all make. There's going to be things you like, things you hate, and you just kind of deal with it. Yeah, but it basically will take, if I can jump back and forth a little bit, you can see how the code is tightly densed, and once we get into the deeply nested logic, it goes off the screen. But if you use black, it's going to format it to about 88 lines, I think is what it tries to do, and make everything fit in one pane. And that's literally 2 commands. So everyone here is fully expected to try it on their own scripts if it's permissible. So then obviously step up from automatic formatting is now you want a little bit of manual formatting. So black can obviously do a lot of things like put the brackets and all the list items on separate lines for you to make it look really pretty. But then comes things like naming variables or using the wrong syntax when there's a more elegant way to do it. That's where something like Flake 8 will come in. And Flake 8 is amazing. And I use it again on all my projects. And this, if you do these 2 steps where you just use like black, isort, and then you get your flake 8 up to code, you'll have noticeably nicer looking Pythonic code with very little effort. And again, when I came at this conversation, I wanted to think like, if you're a very beginner, like what are the things you get tripped up on? Like a lot of people focus on like these little things like, oh, should this be on a new line? Should this be on one line? How should this look? Like, free yourself. Don't worry about any of that. Let the tool do the thinking for you. You don't want to be, you're wasting your time. You're all so much more valuable than thinking about whether these should be on separate lines. It's one command, black command, boom, it's done. I don't think about it. I want to go do something way more fun than think about what line it should be on. So flake 8's a little bit more manual in that it'll tell you like, this function is not the proper casing to what it should be, or this variable. So it won't rewrite the files for you. So you'll have to do a little bit of manual intervention on that. But it's similar to the last one where you can just run it, and it'll just give you a list of a bunch of things that you can do. So it always sucks when you first start using it and you realize how many things you do. But once you get to refactoring, then nothing. Yeah, that's what you like to see. Unix philosophy, no output, nothing's wrong. So now on to like some stylistic choices that are apparent in a lot of Python stuff that I've learned over the years that aren't always so apparent when you first start. The first one is global constants generally tend to stay at the top of the file, and they're capital letters. And I like to use tuples for storing lists instead of lists. So the reason you have the capital letters is it's pretty standard. A good example, if you read when I post this, you'll be able to see like the before and after script. The before script imports a library called crypto, and then you see crypto.filetype_pem. That's a perfect example of global constants, and how you would use them is when you start getting to a size where your script is being utilized by other code, the other code doesn't have to worry about what is file type pem. Does anyone here know what file type pem actually evaluates to? Nah, it's a 1. It's an int. It's an int. And no one here cared, and no one here had to know. And the person who develops the library doesn't have to worry about like, I put it to a 1, but a 1 doesn't make sense, so now I want to change it to a 0. He changes that in his code. You don't care. You're referencing that top level global that's not going to be affecting your code whatsoever. So that's really nice to have. And then the tuples is really nice because you can't modify tuples. That's kind of the point of them, is they're immutable. They can't be changed. So other people can't change them. If it was a list, it's mutable, so you can get into really funny circumstances where things get added or removed, or the list gets duplicated to something else you don't want. So a tuple is just kind of like, you know what? I know what my list is. It's these 9 things. It doesn't need to change. Here you go. And because the list usually will be, or the tuples will be put at the top of the script, I generally will write out a second Python file called constants.py where I'll throw those things because I hate seeing them at the top of my script. So like in the refactored, you can see I import this constants file. And in the constants, all I've done is put the user list and the pass list in there. Just because generally once you get to a certain level of abstraction, you don't really care what the elements of those lists are because you're working at a higher level. Like, I know I'm going to go through this list and this whatever variable I'm going to compare to this variable, blah, 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 blah. So it's nice to have like import constants, and then in your code, you can just go constants.capital name, just like it does in the other libraries. Loading the key file into its own function. So in the original one, scroll down a little bit, the original code right about here for we have like the key files getting loaded, and then it's getting used in a further part of the program. And this will come back to like what Ashia was talking about. I did hear one part with the underscore main. So the point is, if this file was run or somebody imported this file, it would reload the key every single time. And that's not necessarily what everyone wants. You might just want to load the library and then at a further point in time, actually use the contents of it. But anytime you see like some calling to like loading a file, that's a big one. Logging can generally be put into its own function. These things are generally best served by putting them into a function right away so that it doesn't get called every single time. And that will also kind of help with the modularization down the road, because then you won't have to worry about it getting called multiple times. So I just broke that into like load private key. And you don't have to be fancy with it. Like you don't have to think like, should I pass the file name in, or you know, where I should be setting that in the settings. So then I should pull this out and put it in a settings file, and then the settings file should be referenced from this. Like, you don't have to make it complicated. Like functions don't necessarily have to have arguments, so you can just put it as like load private file. And until you have the necessity to change the name of the file, don't worry about it. Don't make it complicated. Long strings into variables before function calls. This is a personal pet peeve of mine. So, as it's open. So perfect, right here. Bottom of the screen, you see results equals sniff, iFace, blah, 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 blah. Who else can tell me what the rest of the arguments to that function are? No one, because it goes off the screen. You can, but we're using Vim. And we only go 80 characters. Yeah, you could use set wrap. So one thing, that's a common one that I use actually quite frequently, because like you're going to generally deal with at some point in your programming career, like a long string. So I like to put like the packet filter as its own variable on a separate line, because you don't need the rest of the context for what's in that string. You just know that it's a filter. And then when you see the sniff below, you can actually see the full call, right? No one could see store equals 0 previously. And while you might think it's not a big deal, like that could be the difference between a developer actually seeing it and noticing that thing or not. They should be checking it all in, but the point is to make this as easy as possible for someone else to understand your code. And contextually, it's going to be a lot easier if you just put it on its own line. Consider using not logic to save on indentation instead of using if logic. So generally when we are writing code, we narrow down based on the filters that we're specifically looking for. So a good example from the packet filter one is if the method is post, and then nested within is if the content type equals this. And that's generally how you're going to approach these problems. But sometimes it's better to think of it like, what if we just shortcut if it's not that? Well, what if it's not post? Well, then I don't really care about what happens after this. So just get back. What if the content type is not that? Just return. I don't want to deal with it. And that saves you 2 whole indents versus it all being laid in. And you might not think about that being a big deal, but 8 characters makes a big difference when you're trying to narrow the scope down to like 88-ish characters. That gives you a lot more room to play with. So that's another common one that I try to do. This was a funny one. I haven't seen this in a while. Unbound local error. So if you try to access a Python variable that doesn't exist, there's an unbound local error exception that gets thrown. And when you get programming, sometimes you just kind of get in this zone where it's like, if you're dealing with try catches, you think that everything should be dealt with try catches. So you get an exception, you're like, just wrap that. But Python's really great because you can just say, if not variable, do something. And then anything after that, you'll obviously know that it exists, versus having to do a try except unbound local error. Makes your code a little bit cleaner. Try excepts are a lot nicer if you can avoid them. but it happens. This was another interesting one that I found. So if you ever have to deal with, you have two lists, and you basically want to go through all of the permutations. So you're going to like, for this list, take this element, and then like go through the second one as provided in the first example. itertools actually provides you with a function called product that will compute the Cartesian product between the two lists, which is super sweet. So now in the first example, you would basically go like, if you loop through the password. If the password is contained in the file, then we loop through the second list. Then we go if. Well, it's a little bit easier if you compute the Cartesian product and then just say like, if both of these things are in the list. That's, again, 2 indent pages. Having a Cartesian product like you can see in the example, you don't have to write 2 for loops within each other. And my kind of like personal rule is like 2 for loops is like a maximum. And it's because it's really ugly and it's a lot harder for people to like kind of process this. Obviously Cartesian products are not like normal that everyone would get off the top of their head either, but it's just a nicer way of writing 2 for loops within each other. So everyone here did learn something, and I did my job. Handling multiple exceptions. This is just another stylistic one that kind of makes things a little bit easier, or a little bit cleaner. You can catch multiple exceptions on the same line. If they all return, if you have like a bunch of them that are just like, catch this, pass, don't do anything, you can just put them all on the same line. Just makes things a little cleaner. And now, the dunder name equals main. Who here knows the difference between these two scripts?
Like the one.
Yeah, if one is called A and is B, if I run both of them, like, what's the difference?
So one day, I'm going to say, hey, I have this cool Python script, but man, I can just like import that into my module. So I'm just going to import it, and then it's going to be like, bam, print hello, what up?
Boom.
Yeah, like, I don't want that. I just want to import its delicious code content without it executing like all at once.
100%. That's exactly what it is. I wrote a tiny little example to make sure that it's little cd to the examples, example 1. All right, so I have the main function, and then I have library 1, and then I have library 2. So library 1 and library 2, the only difference is the dunder main. So if I go Python library 2.py, like what's coming out? You can't see the rest of the string, but it says Python or library 2 loading. So you run it, it says library 2 loading. That's perfect. So now you go to the same with 1, boom, library 1 is loading. All right, now if I run the main script, it doesn't say that the library 2 is loading. And that's what he's trying to explain with what he's saying. So when you run a script, the dunder name is a special variable that gets set by the interpreter. And if you are the main file that gets executed, it gets set to main. So when we're running our scripts, we'll probably want the script to, like if it was the previous one, we want it to load the file up, do the sniffing, do all that. But we're also modularizing our code for future reference, because like one day it's like, I just want to use a couple of the functions in that script. So now I want to just load the file. I don't want to run the packet sniffer, or I don't want to run the packet handler or anything like that. Well, that's what the underscore main lets you do, is like when you import it from another file, then it won't run whatever's in that if statement. So that if statement basically says like, if I'm the file being run, do these things. If I'm being imported, it won't be run. So it just makes your life a little bit easier. And as you grow with your script, you're eventually going to start taking things out, and that's going to make things a lot easier for you, because then you're not going to be like, I imported this file and all these random functions are getting run, but I'm not calling anything. That's what that thing is there to save you for. Yes?
If you recall, actually just did, hey, yeah, totally run this exe file, you're good to go. And that may do that, so it's good advice.
Yeah, so it'll definitely help you not make mistakes. So another fun one I don't get to talk about this one very much. So I want to make a point of it because it also really kind of like, it's always a hard one for beginners to get. So does anyone know the difference between the two different loggers?
I mean, one's logging in debug, not info, which I explicitly said not to use.
Other than that, I have made a mistake. Yeah, you want to share info. Yeah. All right, never happened. All right, so this is also kind of related to the previous one where we're talking about what happens when things get imported. So both will work on a single script just fine, but what happens, this one's going to be tough. Let's go to this one first. All right, so here's another example. Library 1. If you pick what that name is, you've basically set the logger to a constant. So what happens is if you set your name of your logger in this file and then in another file, then they get namespace collisions. And if you don't do the get name, you will also have everything interjected into the main logger. So this is going to be a little bit confusing, but bear with me. I'll try to use this example to explain. So this is a module. Pretend it's like requests or like something that you've imported, and at the top it's got the dunder dunder name, and you import it into your library. And you've probably seen this before where you see like a info statement, blah 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 is being deprecated, this is happening, this changes in the next release, and you're like, God damn, that's annoying. So yeah. So this is our main function, and I've imported library 1, and if I run, I have to cd up into example 2, and if I run the main script, you'll see like debug, library 1, blah, 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 blah. Let's pretend that's that annoying function. If I run the library 1 by itself, you can see its name is dynamically changed to the underscore main, which goes back to the name equals main. When we run the library 1 itself, it's the main entry point. So the name is set by the interpreter to be main. When I import it into my main script, it's changed. It's library 1. That's why you don't get the like code executing when you import it. But also, this basically gives a name to that logger. So if you go like this, so if you get the logger of the one that you want, you can set the level to info, and then now you don't get those annoying notices that were driving you up the wall. The point is, if you just went logging the first example where you go like logging.info, that means every single file in Python has the same logger. You can't individually say like, this file is really noisy and really annoying, I don't want to hear anything from it. And you can get crazy complex with it where you can say like, well, this file, I want to take the logs, I want to write it to a file, this I want to send to an external service. Like you can do crazy things. But the point of adding the underscore name is that now the logger in that file is unique against all the other loggers that get imported into other files. So this helps with that scaling thing down the line. And then just using a REPL for developing code. So when I'm writing code, it's always sometimes pretty tough to be like, should I be putting this in a function? Should all this logic be in one giant function? Like, am I Am I overthinking? Am I over-engineering? Like, what is going to be a good way to actually get use out of the programs that I've written? So the one thing about Python is that it's dynamic. So that means that you can do things at runtime and not have to worry too much about what is actually in the code. If you're using binaries like C or Rust or Go, what the code is what the code is, and you can't change things. But when I'm refactoring scripts and I can't think of like, does this deserve to be its own class or its own function, I like to use the REPL to actually play with the code, because we as humans are tactile learners. Even though we're programmers, we learn by like touching and doing and seeing. We get too caught up in our heads sometimes thinking about stuff that's not really that important. So a REPL is like a good way to just kind of play with stuff. So like a good example is I like to use IPython. Oh, I gotta go to the right directory first though. So IPython also has this really handy function where you can load an extension called auto reload. And then you can auto reload to, that basically is just a magic function that tells IPython that anytime I import a library, I want you to re-import it the next time we go to the next line. So as an example of why would you want to do that? Well, from foo import bar, right? Bar, 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 bar. So especially for my Django development or when I'm playing with stuff, like this is a really awesome way to like get a hands-on feeling for your code and say like, well, where should I put this? I'll put it in a function. And then you run the function and you're like, but I actually wanted to see like in between these two steps, I want to actually inject a variable in there. And then you're like, that means I need to split these two things up into different functions. So using REPLs is like a really good way to just like kind of test drive your script and see if you've really like modularized it in the way that you ideally would use it for other scripts. In the original one, we basically just had this giant packet handler method, and it works. There's not like, it's not bad code, but what happens if you change the file name? Well, maybe we need a function that will be able to take a different file name so we can load it from a different location. Well, if you put that into a function and then you go into your REPL, then you can play with these little pieces of code that you've made, and it gives you a more tactile feeling of like how you've organized your code. So when I'm doing large projects, I generally will like have, I like to think of them as kinks. Like kinks are areas like functions or variables or settings where you can change the behavior of the code so that you can just like, you can play with it, right? Like you should be playing with your code. You should be enjoying all of this. You should be trying like, well, what if I want to put it here instead of here? How does that affect it? Like how do I make this logger shut up when I'm trying to do this thing? Like these are good ways to kind of test drive your code without having to put it into some other script, because it's hard to say like, oh, you should write this for the future in mind. And it's like, well, I've never even been to the future. Like, how do I understand what that's like? Well, it's like, well, how about you write it for someone else who has to use your code? Well, how would you do that? A REPL is a great example of that, because you're using your code as like an external consumer. So you'll find out really quick, like, man, like I can't set this variable, which means like I can't execute the executable, or like I can't change the URL of the executable. Like, that's a really good way to kind of get everything rocking and rolling. So that's it. Questions, comments, concerns? Did everyone learn something today at least? Yeah. No questions though. Yes.
Don't take this bad. I won't ask anything about what you said. I don't know how, but I understood everything. This is my second Python meetup.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about Python 5 months ago. So that's how new I am. And thank you for the presentation. However, there's this concern that I have, which I wish we'd have covered. Because you covered packages there indirectly, I faced this challenge whereby I've had to reinstall Python and everything a second time because when I ran pip freeze outside of my IDE, it was and then I didn't know what to remove because I didn't know what the default setup is.
Ah,
So
yeah.
after doing a reinstall, I ran pip freeze, it was Pygame. I think it's the only package that's there. So the question to you, everyone here, seasoned developers, what's your habit? Do you pip install inside your
Virtual
inside
env.
your projects or outside? And if you pip install outside, what is it that needs to be outside?
Perfect. Okay, so this is a super loaded question, and there's a lot of different ways to handle this that I could do another 40 minutes on. But generally, when it comes to tools, like I'll use linters and tool formatters. Like the first two are the only ones that I'll like kind of install like outside of the project scope. Because I use them everywhere. Like if I CD into another directory, I still want that tool available. But project dependency management, it's completely dependent on what tools you want to use. Like some people use pip and request and like a requirements file, or they'll use pipenv, or they'll use Docker. There's all kinds of different tools. And like honestly, like trust me, even the professionals, like packaging in Python is a little bit of a rigmarole sometimes. And it's like everybody, not even like you think you might think that it's like, oh, I've only been doing Python for a short time and I have this issue. It's like, don't worry, because it stays with you for the whole time. And even the professional programmers I know have issues with those kinds of things, because it's like it's a really complicated thing to try and automate in such a way that the developer doesn't have to think about anything. So there's lots of different tools and stuff, but like package management outside of just like a simple script refactoring is like a whole other topic. It's very complicated, but I think most people will use like some kind of like pip and a virtual env, so that each project has like the dependencies for the project centralized in one area, and then they can like just blow it away and rebuild it if they need to. Because installing to your like to the host machine, that's what happens is you're going to have project 1 says I want version 0.5, project 2 says I want version 6, then you go back to version 5 and it's like, or project 1, it's like this isn't the right version, so it starts throwing errors, and it's like that's programming like in a nutshell, man. Like there's people who spend their entire free time just doing package management for Linux distros, right? Like it's complicated.
Yes.
So don't worry, we all feel your pain.
I have one more question about best practices.
Yeah.
Because you have your best practices, she has the best practices. Where is the go-to root best practices that I should go to that's independent of personalities?
Pep8. So like Pep8 is like Python's like, this is what we think is best practices. And that's why I started off with isort and black. Like you have you can't inject your personal things. Like I can't, like you can go and muck with it if you want, but if you pip install it and run black on a file, you got like the best practices of formatting for your file will be applied for you. So it's a perfect place to start for a beginner, because it'll show you like, oh, like you had this super long line, it should look kind of like this instead. And it'll do all that kind of like from the start. And then Flake 8 is also a really good one to start looking at too. And just going to the Python peps and reading like what the official rules are. I try my best to not inject my personal style into anything and use the defaults. So it's like, hey, like whatever black says is, that's it.
I think part of the where it gets opinion is, I guess, it's just that we all share the same typical goal, and it's just like, is this readable? Is this simple? And if you can shoot for that direction, then all of your work around it will, you may have a different opinionated of what is this function, is this name, is it readable, is this name, is this function, is it reflection. We're all heading towards the same goal. And if you can keep that goal in mind, then the other people, when they're doing code reviews, are like, I would do it differently, but you know what? This is great, this is readable, this is simple, totally. And I think that really is just like where those opinions come out. Yes, there may be different ways of doing things, but as you start developing, you just realize, we have different opinions, but we're all shooting for the same goal.
Yeah.
Simple, we want it readable. Did we achieve that? Cool. We're done.
Yeah, that's why like black and ISORT are perfect. It settles all those arguments, right? Like if you have a file and black says it's good, it's good. I won't pick it apart. It would only be like, would you put it in a function versus not? And that's just being picky. But like that will give you a good start. And like you've already asked the most like important question, which is like, what is the best practice, right? Like that already sets you ahead of like a lot of other programmers because you've already started your journey into what best practices is, right? So just like Ashia said, continue following like what is the best practices. There's a couple good starts here, and then like honestly, like after this script was just like ran through a couple linters, like it looked like a really readable Python script, and it's a good script, and that's because like really at the end of the day, it's like there's only a certain number of ways to write things. So like just automate that and don't worry about it, because you're not paid to lint code. You're not paid to like format code. You're paid to solve business problems, right? Like that's what we're all paid for. Like they don't care what the code looks like. You shouldn't either. Automate it because you're more important than that. Any other questions? In the back.
When you say installing packages outside the project scope, are you talking about like installing packages outside of like a virtual environment?
Yeah, like on the host.
Like basically just like raw.
Yeah, like I install Flake and Black and ISORT just like on my computer with -- user, because like I personally have never ran into any issue with like, oh, you got an older version of Black or Flake. It's like it's just the tool that lints, and that it generally just runs flawlessly.
What happens when you install something from pip? Like if you install like if you look at like a Git repo where you have like pile of requirements, or just pip install whatever, where does that go? Like just
I would love to give another talk on this. Like, I mean, generally, I think they've changed it as of recently, but if you launch Python 3 with the sites, yeah. So Python 3-am site, this shows you what the Python path is on your machine. So you can see that like you got the home, Thorny, work, mine, Python script, blah, 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 blah. That's like where I am right now. User lib, Python, blah, blah, blah. So like the secret behind like what virtual envs are is it's just injecting variables into this. So it's basically like your Python interpreter has a list of directories, and you say import requests. Well, the interpreter goes like, I got this list. Cartesian product time for the first one. Is there requests? All right, here we go. And then it goes like, import this other library. It's not here, it's not here, it's not here, it's here. This is the one that gets loaded. So when you pip install, if you do it like just pip install requests, generally it gets put into like the user lib Python 3.7 sites packages, because it's assuming that it's like the global one. If you go -- user, which doesn't require sudo, which is what you should be doing, it'll put it in the .local lib Python 3.7 site packages. So then when you start using things like virtual env, you say like virtual env, make me a virtual env right here, and then activate the virtual env. And all it basically does, the magic behind it, is it goes, well, I'm going to import this path into the sys path. So then when you're inside your virtual env, you say pip install requests. And it goes like, well, the first one is right here. I'm going to install it here. So then when you're resolving packages, it's resolving from the different file system location rather than the global one. But if you're missing something and it's still in the global one, it'll traverse the list and still load it from the global one if it's not installed inside your environment. It's actually that simple. It just everything seems so much more complex because no one explains anything. They just say, yeah, you pip install the module and it's there, and then you just import it and it's magic, and then you don't have to worry anything. And then you have an instance where the one in your local one is missing, so it's grabbing the one from your host system, but that has a dependency that's not being met in your local one because of the resolution order of the things, and people are like, I don't blow it away and just restart from scratch. And that's generally what a lot of people end up doing, myself included. Sweet.